Now, one of these concerns is that the political strategy of BDP has so far been, by and large, an anti-AKP strategy. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that their main target is AKP, and they will do whatever it takes to further that position. One of the reasons this is being done by BDP, I think, is because they rely on the 40% no votes given in the constitutional referendum in 2010. So they believe that 42% of Turkish people, those who are allowed to vote, are anti-AKP, and therefore if they base their political agenda on anti-AKP strategy, they could at least get some of those votes, which I think is completely wrong, because that 42% is in fact the votes that come from CHP, MHP, namely the ultra-right, and also what we call the white Turks, namely upper middle class and upper class Turkish people who are afraid of AKP's power and who think that AKP is doing double talk, etc. Now, I shall give you some examples of the anti-AKP strategy, examples that might surprise you. One of them is that supporters of BDP have been participating recently in the rallies of CHP, which is, of course, the strongest opposition to AKP. In the past, that was something that we haven't been witnessing. And we also have heard some statements to the effect that BDP would rather prefer MHP, the ultra-right movement party, to AKP, and that came from official mouths. Again, something quite unthinkable in the recent past. Now, of course, the discourse articulated by the individual candidates stress some of the fundamental demands of the left, such as labor, such as democracy, such as freedom, and not just civic freedom, but freedom for forms of life, including gay, lesbian, transsexual rights, and so on. So the candidates themselves, individually, have their own agenda, but the question is how far the individual discourses of these individual candidates will match or do match the politics of BDP after the elections. So that is one major concern for me, namely the narrow scope of the political strategy of BDP. In that sense, being so narrow, the question is, does it really match with the expectations of the Turkish left? A second consideration, or a point that I want to take into consideration, is that the Turkish politics is being developed within the circumstances of the Middle East, naturally. And so it is not exactly relevant to or cover the demands of the left in the western part of Turkey, including, in particular the question of labor and other questions. So given they send their deputies to the parliament after or at the elections, I do not know how far they will be able to represent the demands of the left of the West, non-Kurdish left in the parliament. So that again is a second concern that I have. And a third concern that I would have is that, for a similar reason, the discourse of BDP is increasingly becoming nationalistic. It used to be a much more radical left discourse, but it has been recently becoming a nationalistic discourse. As I said a few minutes ago, Abdullah Öcalan, when describing the democratic bloc, he used the term national democratic bloc. And where I would like to emphasize the word national, okay? Although, as I say, other people, namely the individual candidates themselves, articulate such notions as democracy, labor, freedom, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, these are my concerns, okay? Because these concerns may not entirely overlap with those of some other left groups that belong to the bloc. Because as I said, the bloc itself is not homogeneous. There are different groups and parties in the bloc that have radically different views. And it is just a strategic alliance, and it doesn't represent any kind of unity of thought or political position. What am I saying this? I'm saying this because, after all, a strong commitment to the nation, which is a legacy of the legend that all anti-imperialist politics is de facto left-wing politics, is an important element in, I would say, a substantial part of the Turkish left. In other words, a strong nationalist tendency still informs much of the discourse of the left in Turkey. And in that sense, my concern that BDT's political discourse is becoming increasingly nationalistic may not be shared by all other groups or left-wing activists. But again, this is not the only position, because within the Turkish left, recently there has emerged certain groups which are strictly anti-nationalist, anti-Kemalist, anti-militarist, and for radical freedoms at all aspects of life. Okay? Here are my concerns, and now I come to some predictions. What happens after the elections? My colleagues already gave you some of the main possibilities, and I will just take a different perspective, not entirely different, but make some contributions, which are not very deep, because we still have 10 days to go for the elections. In my view, there is no question that AKT will win the elections with an overwhelming majority. Okay? Now, I take this to be a fact of the matter, and at this point, I'm not going to talk about the amount of possible votes or the percentage that AKT and CHP might get. But the fact that AKP will come to power with an overwhelming majority creates another, for me, a major problem. One reason that I have this problem is that the recent discourse of AKP is or has been moving in the direction of racism against BDP. Okay? Although I know that there are two wings within AKP, the mitigated versus the more, I would say, aggressive, for example, the recent discourse of Tayyip Erdogan. So there is this tendency, which is moving in the direction of ethnicism and even worse, racism. There is also what are called the crazy projects of Tayyip Erdogan. Okay, you may have heard of them, the crazy projects. For example, opening up a canal that would connect the Black Sea to the Marmara Sea and make the European side of Istanbul and islands, etc. I don't think that's a crazy project. I don't think Tayyip Erdogan is crazy. He has a temper problem, I know that. I can observe that. But he's not crazy. These are not crazy projects. These are neoliberal projects. And there is no question that these are liberal projects that aim to integrate Turkish economy with global capitalism. I do not think that at this point AKP is against capitalism or anything of that sort. Okay? So this, of course, is an observation from the left point of view. So it is hard, given all these things, the crazy projects and the change in the discourse and so on, it's hard to foresee the extent to which AKP would use the power entrusted to them. Okay. So what happens? Who stops AKP if they come with an overwhelming majority? I'm not saying that they are going to go berserk, but what I'm saying, if they do go beyond certain limits,